Welcome to the Dare to Multiply podcast. On this podcast, we help passionate Jesus followers become courageous, obedient disciples who impact their communities for the kingdom of God. I'm your host, Cynthia Anderson, a disciple multiplication coach and trainer. We have some amazing guests coming up, people who are taking risks to launch new discipleship movements in their areas. I can't wait to learn from them and introduce you to their ministries. Together, we'll show you how to make and multiply disciples and groups in your area. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and our YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any tools or content coming your way. I also wanted to mention a free newsletter on disciple making that I send out every single week. It's called Daring Disciples, and it's all about how to share your faith, overcome obstacles we all face in the journey toward multiplication. To subscribe to that, go to daretomultiply.com/newsletter. Let's dare to multiply. Are you an inspiration or an irritant? I don't know. Sometimes I can be both, and maybe it's okay to be both. Today, we are going to be talking with Rich Robinson. He's one of the co-founders of the Movement Leaders Collective, and we'll be talking about inspiring and leading change towards movements and movemental Christianity. Fascinating conversation coming up. I'll be right back with that in just a moment. It's hard to believe, but we are almost at 100 episodes of the Dare to Multiply podcast. I can hardly believe it. God has been so good and has used this podcast to bless so many people all over the globe. I am just in awe at what he has done. And so I thought, since we're going to hit 100 episodes very soon, we should plan a party and a celebration. And so that's what we are going to do. And I would love to invite you to join us for a live broadcast at the time we normally release this podcast. So that will be on March 3rd at 8 p.m. Central USA time, which is March 4th, 9 a.m. Thailand time. We're going to be celebrating what God has done through the podcast. Lord willing, we're going to have some special guests from those who were in some of our most popular podcast episodes back with us for that event. We'll be announcing some new things. Believe me, you're going to want to hear these announcements of some great things coming up. We'll be having a giveaway for those who attend live. We'll be having some merchandise. We'll also be having some books that we're giving away, so be sure to show up for that. And how can you get involved? This is what you need to do. Send us your questions for the Q&A that you want to ask me or any of our guests, special guests who will be with us. Again, we're still planning all this, but I'm hoping you can watch actually on our social media. You'll see who they're going to be, as we'll be announcing that about a week beforehand. And so send in your questions about disciple making that you've wanted to ask. And I'll be sure to answer those questions live together with our guests who are with us answering as well. And then besides sending in questions or showing up live to ask your questions, we want you to show up to the event itself. I would be so encouraged to see you guys there. And let's celebrate together. You have been an amazing, amazing listening audience. So encouraging to me. You guys are absolutely the best. Let's celebrate together what God has done and look forward to another 100 episodes, daring to multiply disciples courageously all across the globe. So be sure to take note of that date. You can click the link in the show notes to sign up and get a reminder about it. March 3rd, 8 p.m. Central, March 4th, 9 a.m. Thailand. It'll be about 45 minutes to an hour celebration together of what God's done. I really, really hope I'll get to see you there. Now, back to our episode. I am here on the podcast today with Rich Robinson, and Rich is one of the co-founders, if I got that right. Did I get that right, Rich, of the Movement Leaders? Yeah, Movement Leaders Collective, which is a group of people who are corporately pursuing movements around the world. Rich has been involved in that from the very beginning. We're looking forward to hearing more about that, but it's a new group to me. Just recently got a chance to join that and I'm connecting there. But Rich, it's a joy to have you on the Dare to Multiply podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Cindy. Really looking forward to being able to talk a little bit more about the work we do, the book, and tell some stories and explore some ideas. Looking forward to it.
That's going to be great. Well, our topic today is inspiring and leading change towards movements. And Rich has a new book out, which I've been going through. I haven't fully finished it, but I've read a lot of it. Rich, it's called All Change. We'll talk about that book. But leading change is a big deal. It is not easy to get a ship to turn or to get a group of people who've been going in one direction to move in another one. And yet a lot of us who are working in movements, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to turn the ship. We're trying to shift mindsets and ways of thinking and ways of doing church and organizations towards a more movemental way of operating. So Rich comes as someone with a lot of experience in that. He's working with different groups around the world as they initiate these kinds of changes. But I don't know a ton about you, Rich, though everything I read sounds amazing. But introduce yourself a little bit more and share with us kind of how did you start this journey of thinking about movements and movemental work?
Yeah, thank you. So I am married to Anna, who we got married in 2002. So we've been married since 2002. So coming up on 23 years, and have Josiah, Esther, and Samuel, 19, 17, and 15. We're in Edinburgh, in Scotland. I'm an Englishman that lives in Scotland. We spent, previous to that, we've been there 10 years, a lot of time, nearly 20 years in Sheffield, in Northern England, industrial Northern England. And that's where my movement journey starts. So I became a Christian as a college student, a university student in my second year. I was playing football, soccer, and really intrigued by the lifestyle and sharing of so many different things of two guys in the football team, the soccer team. And so I, in effect, was saved into a missional community, a micro church of young adults sharing Jesus, sharing their life in a missional context. And the church that I was at, St. Thomas's Church, that really was the basis for some of the 3DM disciple making toolkits, so life shapes and learning communities and missional communities. That was my young adult formation. So I sort of became a Christian in a scattered context, a missional context, an incarnational context. And so that was my formation. It was all I'd ever known. And so over the 20 years, the whistle stop tour would be, we did kids and youth work on different housing estates, sort of government housing projects, so living amongst and working with alongside the poor. I then took some time to be able to increase my coaching and training. So we got a grant as a local church. So I went from part-time working and serving in the local church and part-time training and equipping other churches and leaders and denominations that were interested in how we were mobilizing everyday people to missional discipleship. So going from sort of full-time in the church to part-time, translocal, part-time local, that was probably the start of my training journey. So there was 20 years of living movementally in a local context. So missional community, micro church, training missional community leaders, creating resources, and really across the diversity of a city of 600,000, the ethnicity diversity, the social diversity, lots of different pockets where the good news was embodied by smaller communities. And then the training work gave me the opportunity to work first in Europe, in different countries with leaders that were trying to spark these disciple-making movements and disciple-making revolutions within an existing context and initiations outside an existing context. So we worked with people starting and sparking movements from nothing, as well as trying to do a new thing in an old environment or an existing environment, perhaps not an old environment. And so that was how I met Alan over the years. And we came together 6 it was 10 years ago to start to build training around APEST, so the fivefold ministry, apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher. And we started 5Q Collective to train around the apostolic. And really, in Alan's book, The Forgotten Ways, he talks about 6 key elements of movement dynamics. And we were building training around one with APEST. We have a great friendship, covenant, synergy. There's a real grace on our relationship. And we said, what would it look like to gather the leaders in a relational network and a peer learning environment who are really trying to innovate? So those sort of innovators, dreamers, pioneers, who are often sort of going first or further into new forms and new frontiers, could we gather them together to encourage each other, learn from each other? And then could we work with them? So some co-creation, some coaching, some training to really maximize their effectiveness in the domains that they lead. So the Movement Leaders Collective came out of 20 years of local praxis, as well as 15 years of training alongside that local praxis, friendship relationship with Alan, and the opportunity to be able to really work with a group of people that are yeast in the dough for the current more attractional or institutional form of Christianity. We're looking to make that shift to catalyze movemental Christianity, so that the go and make, every tribe, every tongue.
Right. Wow. So you said a lot there. I'm going to unpack it just a tiny bit for some of our listeners. You talked about just now catalyzing movemental Christianity. That's a little bit different language than we sometimes use in the disciple making movement, church planting movement world, which is probably my primary context that I've been working in. A lot of our listeners are involved in CPMs or DMMs in some way, but we have a lot of people as well who are in existing structures and wondering what to do. How do you bring change, or is there possibility of bringing change to those structures? And so that's part of why I really wanted to have you on here on the Dare to Multiply podcast, because I really want to help people who are in that context. And I don't always know how to. A lot of what I've done is pioneering in the unreached, in places where there's little church context. And yet almost everywhere, we've been working in Kenya or different places where there are already existing structures and churches. And we want to be a blessing to the existing structures, not a curse to them in some way, or not destroy them. We want to bless them and help them, serve them. And so this is a really timely interview. But we are talking about catalyzing movemental Christianity, not only talking about how to launch a disciple-making movement today with Rich on here. So really excited. Thanks for sharing your journey and how you grew up kind of in this, in your life in Christ, being part of a missional community. Again, another word that we don't always use in disciple-making movement context, missional community. And we have had Alan on the Dare to Multiply podcast, so you guys can go back and listen to Alan talking about these different aspects of his framework, I guess I would say. We've had Neil Cole on to talk about APEST as well. So if you're interested in that, I'll link those podcasts as well in our show notes. But getting on with what I wanted to talk to you about, let's talk about this framework in your book, the All Change book. And you outline kind of this 4-phase framework for leadership of bringing about change. Tell us a little bit about that. I know people should read the book. We're going to recommend that, but give us an outline, a taste.
Yeah, definitely. So it came out of my personal study of the Gospel of Luke and 15 years of training leaders. And you're absolutely right, Cindy. In our Movement Leaders Collective world, we work across a real diversity and spectrum. So we have disciple-making movements, micro church networks, all the way through to denominations that are trying to recover their movemental heritage. So we have probably a broader spectrum rather than just directly into the unreached people groups. But this is a framework that works across the spectrum. We've intentionally written it not as the end result is X, and so it sort of pushes you to a vehicle or a sort of directive, or you have to now do X, Y, Z. What it does is take the leadership journey of Jesus, the ultimate change agent, and through the Gospel of Luke, chart these 4 phases that whether you're starting a business, a CPM, a DMM, whether you're trying to transition a denomination or sharpen and really strengthen a network across most contexts, these are principles because they're Jesus-based, biblically based change dynamics. The skin looks different, but the skeleton is the same. So 4 phases. So the first one is dream. So that's Luke chapters 2-6. And so Jesus comes as a catalyst to disrupt the present, to unlock kingdom imagination, to spark in everyday people the potential for something more and different and further. And so there's this challenge to what exists in the religious architecture and structure. And there's the initiation, the disrupting, but also the inviting into something that we're able to dream. And so in a leadership context, we would say, Catherine Booth says, to better the present, we must first disrupt to better the future, we must first disrupt the present. And so
say that one more time. Say that one more time.
Catherine Booth, who's the founder of the Salvation Army, said, if we're to better the future, we must first disrupt the present. So we don't get that better future without a little bit of disruption. And so that disruption might be going into a new people group or a new environment. It might be casting a new vision. It might be challenging an organization to think differently. It may be stretching goals, lots of different contexts. But that dream phase, we see Jesus as a catalyst. So that's the first phase. We go down and there's a picture of a curve. It's never a sort of linear or an upward to the right change journey. It's down into the valley. So the sort of the valley of the shadow of death from Luke, from Psalm 23, or the Exodus journey involving the desert. So that dream is a future that we want to move towards, but we have to go down into this process. Then the next phase is discover. So discover is Luke chapters 7-11. So what we see is Jesus broadcast publicly the invitation and challenge to the crowd, but make the invitation privately to a few pioneers. So we're not trying to mobilize the masses at this stage. There's a big dream. We need to find the scouts, the special forces, the Sodelmans, those that will go and learn experientially, test, prototype, trial, figure out with some learning and effort, rather than just this conceptual, oh, we want to see that dream, we're going to think about it, architect it on a whiteboard in an office, and then it's going to work. So the second phase is discover. So you're testing your theories, you're prototyping, and a small group are embracing risk to go first and further and learn. So that's really experiential learning. I generally say that the Gospels that we don't read, Jesus doesn't go, Beatitudes, I'm coming back next Sunday, Beatitudes, I'm going to be in a different town next Sunday, Beatitudes. And we don't hear that. We also don't read the gospel, which is calling the disciples, disappearing for 3 years, filling them with knowledge, thoughts, concepts, then parachuting them back. The disciples learnt on the job. It was apprenticeship in the shadow, in the dust, on the shoulder of the master. So there's that experiential learning in discover. We then come through to design. So that's Luke 12-22. So as we go through the Gospel of Luke, Jesus becomes a storyteller. So he goes from a catalyst in the dream phase to a coach in the discover phase, and then a challenger in the design phase. So what you're looking to do there in the design phase, Jesus's parables are kingdom principles that are trying to take bystanders, disciples to become leaders and future movement makers. So in that phase, the experiential learning, you've tested a few things, you've got a core group, you're now trying to create a frame that can mobilize many. So you're bringing in others into that space. So what are our core principles? That stays the same. That's intentional. And then there's creative and contextual practices. So if prayer is a core principle, the contextualized practice of prayer could be singular, could be communal, could be with words, could be with music, could be at the start of the day, the end of the day. So we're not being formulaic and saying everybody in our movement prays at 7 o'clock and prays this prayer. But what we are saying is a core principle of our movement is that we're people of prayer and we have a practice of prayer. And there might be some commonality, but there has to be the flexibility for contextualization. So the design phase is the DNA, the architecture, the skeleton that allows then the contextualization, creativity as it multiplies. And then finally, final phase is deploy. So the end of the Gospel of Luke 22 to the end and into Acts. So there Jesus becomes a champion. He is gifting and giving and investing every piece of resource his team need to go further. So there's that generative people movement, multiplication, Great Commission, and the ascension and the infilling of the Holy Spirit that empowers that work. So dream, discover, design, deploy. And as a leader, you're being a catalyst, then a coach, a challenger, and then finally a champion. And then the cycle repeats. So we see that generative multiplication. So whether that's being a Christian entrepreneur starting a business or an enterprise, whether it's a denominational leader wanting to reset their denomination, whether it's a disciple maker going into a new people group or new context, that journey of Jesus gives hopefully a map. It's not a formulaic sort of prescriptive, you have to do X, Y, Z, but it's descriptive to help a leader in terms of the journey of pioneering towards change.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. And I really appreciated that outline in the book as well. I am definitely an entrepreneur and have pioneered several new ministries throughout my years in missions and ministry. And I could identify with different ones of these. Some of it I was like, oh, I'm not sure I did the dream phase and the design. Maybe I did those together, or, it's not exactly a step-by-step always, but the process is really helpful, especially as you're beginning something new and also looking back. And I'd love to actually have a call with you sometime and look at my most recent pioneering work and see where I'm at on this journey. And I don't know if I can get a free coaching call with you or not, but would love to would love to unpack that a little bit more in my context, because definitely things that I could relate to as I was going through this. I just wanted to comment on the dream part, because I sent a quote from that to my team. And one of the things that you said there, let me just actually read this so that I get it right. It's in, you list the scripture from scriptures from Luke 2-6, and you say your change agent journey. And it says, where do you need to operate as a catalyst to be both an inspiration and an irritant within your organization or venture? And I had to laugh when I read that, and I sent it to my team, as I said, because I was like, yep, that's me. I inspire a lot of people, and I am definitely an irritant to a lot of people. And I tell people I make people feel challenged, sometimes irritated. My husband makes people feel safe and secure. So we're a great team. But it's part of that process of bringing about change. And Jesus wasn't afraid to sometimes be an irritant, to sometimes stir the pot or disrupt things. So yeah, I wanted to highlight that, because I don't know about you, Rich, if you're like that too, but some of us who can be irritating in our disruptiveness.
Definitely am, Cindy. I'm in that camp.
It can be kind of like, I don't always like being that person that seems to rock the boat all the time. And, people aren't always happy with me or happy with us when we do that. And yet Jesus did that. and he was willing to pay the price of irritating a bit in order to provoke change. So anything you want to respond to what I just said there, Rich, before we go on?
Yeah, well, I can definitely certified irritant. I've got that badge for me, 100%. Yeah, I think what I would say is, you mentioned your husband, and I would say we're trying to break the solo heroic image of leadership that is in the more attractional and institutional forms of Christianity. If anyone could have been a solo heroic leader, it was Jesus, and he chose to work in and through people. I think I'm also naturally a catalyst, so inspiration, irritant, dream. The challenge for me is to make sure that I do the coach and the challenge of make sure I do I love discover, but I don't always stay long enough to do design to mean that it's not actually able to sustain and scale. So learning that, where am I strong, where am I weak? I need to slow down and stay present in the design phase and make sure it settles and scales rather than move on to the dream. But in the same way, there's a lot of people that are designers, or they like to champion and release people, but actually they're just building systems without dream, vision, strategy, purpose, and push and stretch towards something. So we need each other. As a leader, you need to be able to hold space in all four of those, but you'll have natural spaces that feel like oxygen, and I wake up every day and this is who I am. And then there'll be other times you say, if I just move to the next dream, I'm going to leave my team in the valley without the skills and the frame and the aptitude to really solidify and then scale what we've started. And the immature catalyst or immature dream is sort of, and we've all seen it, sort of the litany of half started, half finished, lots of good ideas, gets distracted. So in each of them, there's a sort of darker side where the superpower becomes kryptonite and the strength becomes a weakness, if we're not mature enough to hold space in the different elements rather than just the ones we're natural in.
So good. And I think, again, in that, the APEST framework of looking for others on your team who maybe aren't, like I mentioned about my husband, Todd, he's not the one who's going to provoke people, but he is the one who's going to walk alongside them. And he has that pastoral kind of side to him. So, yeah, such a good word. Well, you talk about adaptive leadership, and tell us what that means, that word.
Yeah, so generally what adaptive leadership is understanding that we are in a complex environment, not a simple environment, that there are multiple factors at play in terms of emotional, spiritual, structural, financial, economic, relational. There's so many different factors. So our leadership needs to be adaptive rather than formulaic. So we're understanding our core principles. So there's a clarity in terms of who we are, but there's a creativity in terms of how we then express those values or pursue that vision. So it's sort of, we're clear and set on the destination, but flexible on the journey. We are absolutely clear on these are the core principles, but actually how they're contextualized in practice, we often need to adapt. And it's often in a DMM context, for instance, if we're formulaic, we miss, or if we're trying to plant a church, we're formulaic, we're actually not able to understand the context we're in. We're actually not able to really contextualize the principle. So what I mean in that sense is, it's not just a one size fits all sort of playbook or run sheet or vehicle. It's not sort of, if you've only got a hammer, then you're just going to hit everything. It's like there's a lot of you need tools in your toolkit or on your tool belt rather than just one. If you've only got one vehicle or one modus operandi in leadership, then it may work, but it may not work. There's no adaptation to the context. So it's having that consistency of values, belief, and calling, but the creativity that goes with contextualization.
I think that's so important. And again, having been someone who's worked more than 30 years in the DMM CPM world, I think one of the concerns I have is when people become really, really committed to a methodology rather than being committed to the mission, which is to multiply disciples, in as fast a way as possible to reach the most, see people's lives transformed, and see the kingdom multiplying. And I think when we get committed to a method or our set of tools, or our particular thing that we've created, and we're not able to adapt because it is a complex, constantly changing environment. Our world is changing, and it's changing rapidly. And as movemental leaders, we absolutely have to be adaptive while sticking to our values and principles, and willing to grow and change and evaluate, and not just do things because that's the way we did them in, I've seen this happen, people who saw movements in Uzbekistan and then they moved to another context, and what they did there absolutely did not work. Though they had been extremely fruitful, they did the exact same things, did not work in the new context, or didn't lead to fruit, as quickly as they had hoped. So important. Tell us a little bit more. What are some of the biggest challenges for leaders today in that complex environment?
I mean, you mentioned one, Cindy, is one of the challenges is when we're successful in one place with one vehicle, that the danger is that becomes the one that we use in context 2, 3, 4. And so we can almost be tricked by success, so to speak, that we become formulaic. So the language we use is don't let the vehicle become the vision. The vision is the vision. The vehicle serves the vision. The vehicle is not the vision. So I think some of the challenges, I mean, many and varied. The urbanization, the digital revolution, sexuality, economics, politics, environment, generational trends, transfer of wealth from a boomer generation. There are so many different things that are disrupting the present. We've never been in a time where there is both more in terms of quantity cultural change, but also the pace of change. So we're no longer talking about a generation sort of having a similar culture for 5 or 10 years. Cultural trends are shifting every 18 months now. So even if you crack the code in culture, in 18 months' time, you have to go about starting as a learner again. So the pace of change, the layers and levels of change, the intertwined nature of change, there is so much in there. So that's why the unlocking kingdom potential in a world we weren't prepared for is the strapline of the book, because it really is, for most leaders, it's a world that they weren't prepared for as a pioneer, as a leader, as a disciple. And so this is a new world that we're living in. So nobody has the playbook post AI, post COVID, post political upheaval, post environmental crisis, post that we're all living as learners, and therefore the sort of imagination, childlike faith, exploration, we're far more sort of scientists, dreamers, explorers than we are production line managers or factory foremen, to be able to say we're just running the program and spitting out disciples the other side, versus we're actually having to dream and reimagine what is good news to this people group, and how do I help to create and form robust disciples in an ever-changing world, and how do we begin to really see multiplication happen, not just cloned behavior or activity or sort of extra volunteers. So there's lots of dynamics, I would say, Cindy, that you could pick one of them and write PhDs and spend like hours and hours of reading and do conferences on and roundtables, and like there's, and the challenge is that 9 or 10 that you can just reel off this. That's the challenge that most pastors and most pioneers find themselves in right now.
Yeah, so true. And in some ways, it can almost be disheartening for
Yeah.
those of us who are wanting to bring change. It's like things are constantly changing. I just feel like I'm gaining traction, and then there's another huge disruption in the world. And, how do I get traction in bringing the change and the vision that God's placed in my heart? And yet, what encourages me in this, and I'd love to hear what encourages you, but is just the opportunity to dream with God, and that he really is the one who inspires divine imagination within us, and partnering with him, and the joy of partnering with him in the midst of change, and how he prepares us for it if we'll listen carefully. I was just in Nepal, Rich, and a place where we worked 35 years ago, and I was so struck by how many things are exactly the same as they were 35 years ago, and yet many things are completely different.
Yeah.
And so even in a country like like Nepal, or in some places in the backwaters of northern Nigeria, some things are very much the same, not changing very fast. But there's other places, where the pace of change is just so fast. But for me, that's what makes me encouraged in the midst of change is, okay, we get to go back to God and dream with him, and he's going to show us what to do and where to go and how to steer these things forward. Yeah, does it ever feel disheartening to you?
Yes, every day. I think absolutely, Cindy, and you're right. I would talk probably the work in cities and the work in a Western context. Many of those things are different in a rural Asian or rural African context. Definitely. I think every day I'm disheartened and every day I'm hopeful, and it's learning to live in the in between rather than trying to be sort of hope becoming triumphalist or sort of uh, almost escapism, and on the other side sort of being disheartened becoming cynicism or overwhelming and sort of you give up. So it's living in that sort of dynamic, where I think you're naming the current challenges, which I think is the same as being a disciple. Every day I wake up being defined by sin, leading my own life, putting myself on the center of my life, and my orientation is towards rebellion. And every day I wake up chosen, loved, saved, with the power of the Holy Spirit to live with Jesus and for Jesus every day. And they're both true. They sort of war within me. But so as a pioneer and as a parent, I feel the same. You're sort of 2 or 3 great decisions away from nailing it, and 2 or 3 bad decisions away from scratching your head, going, "What on earth am I doing?" And blah, blah, blah. So I think
Love
naming
that.
that vulnerability of both being true, Cindy, I think is important. And then that's in one sense why we created the Movement Leaders Collective, because it's a different weight for a pioneer that's trying to change what exists or to start something new than it maybe is for other people with other leadership responsibilities within a system or within a team. So you need people and prayer to really fuel and solidify that living in the in-between, I would say.
So good. Yeah. Talk a little bit more about kingdom imagination. We've referenced it a couple of times, but you talk about that in the book. What's that all about? And how do we train our teams, ourselves, the people we're working with, to have kingdom imagination?
Yeah, so I mean, the little strapline is kingdom imagination rather than human management. So it's not trying to engineer something in our own strength, but it's about allowing God to reveal to us his preferred future. So it's revelation, it's the metanoia Jesus talks about when he says the kingdom is close, metanoia, so shift your thinking, pisteo, act into that good news. So it's that sense of God reorientating to allow us to reimagine. So what is God's preferred future? And that some of the ways that we do that is say, if we pray the Lord's Prayer, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven, what does the future look like where God's kingdom has come and his will is being done on earth? Let's imagine that and live towards that. Or it may be that we say the parable of the sower. What would a 30, 60, 100-fold harvest look like in the next 5 to 10 years, which is not you work 30, 60, 100-fold harder and try and but God breaks in and breaks through. It might be thinking around our Eden dynamics. So in Eden, original design for humanity was relationship with God without having to win it or earn it. There was the provision, everything that they needed to do what they were doing, and a kingdom responsibility to work, subdue, and run the garden. So some of the future is, well, let's dream without a fear of lack, a fear of failure, a fear of rejection, a fear of poverty, a fear of What does that future look like? Which is not centering ourselves to be the hero, but it's allowing God to work. And the final one we talk about is childlike faith. So we like adult-like intellect, which is a management system, a strategic plan, a load of effort, and our smarts and ingenuity. And you say children just believe and they imagine, and we just see a chair. What a child sees is a myriad of possibilities. So it could be a plane, boat, zoo, climbing frame, weapon, space rocket, whatever it be. So let's try and imagine the future where the good news of Jesus is embedded and extended. And so it's just trying to push a leader beyond their own self, beyond some of their education, beyond some of their effort, beyond some of their worldview, to say, what could this look like? So come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men wasn't a particularly clear, strategic, bullet pointed presentation with a roadmap. It was an inspirational invitation to somebody to go on an adventure with him, with Jesus. So it's that sort of, what do you dream? What do you imagine? What's possible? And a kingdom future, not a bigger badge and brand or more effort or human-centered success.
I love that. Yeah, so important. I think some people are more natural dreamers than others, as you've mentioned, and I think that's definitely true. Some people, it comes more easily, but I think all of us, if we truly are engaging with movemental Christianity, we have to learn how to dream with God and dream his dreams and let him put his dream in our heart of what he is desiring to do in our community, in our organization. And that's sometimes a little scary. I know I was having a coaching call with someone I'm working with, and we asked them to write an end vision statement, which is kind of this God-sized dream of what would it look like if multiplication really began to take off in your area. And he had come back with just this it was like a 1-year plan of what he could do. And that's normal. But I said, let's take that a little further. What would it look like if it went beyond that? What would it look like if it you really began to see ordinary disciples making disciples? And so good. So critical. I love that part, but that's me. I'm a dreamer. So talk about experiential learning. You referenced that as we were talking about the phases, but why do you see experiential learning as so important in this process? And what does it look like practically? Maybe give us an example of someone who's doing that.
Yeah, so often we act our way into a new way of thinking. It's more Hebraic. We have the more cerebral, conceptual, theological and theoretical. We need to learn about God, or we just stay in our heads so often. So for the person that you're coaching, a big dream starts with a first step. So if this is the big dream of multiple generations and much geography and multiplication, where do you start? Who's your first person of peace? Who's your first leader that you'll invest in? Who are the 5 to 6 that you could start with to be able to socialize the vision, test the vision, grow, and you learn as you go. So we talk about the experiential sort of experience-based learning, because you can sit in a classroom and learn about something, but it's very different than being on the field in the dust, the shadow of the rabbi, to be able to actually test it and to learn it. So there's two parts, I would say, Cindy, about experiential learning. One is we get better learning as a disciple and a leader ourselves because we experience something rather than just hear about it or learn about it in our head. But the other piece is that we get better data to actually test the vision and actually be able to say, no, our big dream is slightly off, or we're stepping towards that big dream, and the dream becomes clearer on the journey. So we can either stay in our heads and never start the journey, or we can learn about something and not actually know it. So we've got, with 2 or 3 pioneering organizations, that they're starting what they call the discover process. So they're releasing some prototypes where they're testing in different neighborhoods, different networks. They're testing different missional activities to be able to see, does this work? Why does this work? Why does this not work? They're starting some conversations in those neighborhoods of what's good news. Why do you like living here? What would you change? What's bad news for you? So they're testing with a small number so that they can take some learning back to a larger group and say, well, here's 3 or 4 ideas, or here's some that we want you to test in the next phase. So the discover phase means we get out of our head as a learner, but we also begin to test and embody the vision as a leader. Both of those are important.
So true. And I often tell people, what we're trying to teach you, you cannot learn from watching my videos or listening to my podcast. You have to go try it. You have to go do it. And as you do it, you're going to learn, and you're going to make mistakes, and some things will work and some things won't. And I know that for me, I'm constantly learning as I experience things that I'm trying or testing, or things that flop. I learn a lot from my failures.
We learn more from failures. I would say, when it works, we often take the credit and keep going. When it fails, we're actually aware of ourselves, our humanity, and far more open to listening to what God might want to say to us and do the work in us. I would agree.
Wow. That's a good word in and of itself. Well, our time is almost up, and I want to make sure to give you a chance to talk a little bit more about your resources. How do people connect with you? How do people get in touch? Tell us a little bit more too about the book and how they purchase that, if you would.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. So you can access the 2 initiatives that we have. So Movement Leaders Collective is movementleaderscollective.com, and that will bounce you to different things that we do. And then Creo is creoventures.co, which is our work with Christian entrepreneurs and faith-driven organizations. So there's 2 websites there for you. The book,
that's CREO, Creo.
CREOVENTURES.co. So creoventures.co, and then movementleaderscollective.com are the 2 websites. And then what you also are able to do is at the allchangejourney.com. So www.allchangejourney.com is access lots of free resources. So what you have there is, for each of the phases, there's toolkits, there's videos, there's resources that you can actually go, I've got the book and I can watch a 6-minute video on the dream, or I can do a toolkit with some, so there's exercises for each of the phases for teams to do and organizations to do. So that's where you're able to get the resources. And then the books are available to purchase on Amazon. And then also you can get a bulk order on our ministry platform. So that's www.themxplatform.com. So the mxplatform.com, and the is in the web address. So that's where you're able to get a bulk for us. So www.themxplatform.com. PLAT form. There we go. Perfect. Thank you, Cindy. So
yeah, did I get it? Okay.
You got it right. So that's where you can get the multiple. The All Change Journey is where all of the free resources are. So there's lots of free resources, and we offer coaching and training around this journey. So you can find me on Twitter or email me, which is rich@movementleaderscollective.com. So that's a long email address for you. You can kind of type away, but that'd be great.
Perfect.
To be able to with you.
And we will link to all of those on the webpage as we release this. And also on the YouTube channel, right underneath the description, we'll have all those links for you so you can connect with Rich. Well, as we wrap up, and boy, time has gone fast, any final word of encouragement, especially to those who are kind of just beginning this journey of being a movemental ministry, a movement effort that they're involved in?
I would finish with the reality of Psalm 23, which is what our All Change journey, the curve that we see Jesus take in Luke, is there is a greener pasture, but it is accessed by going through the valley of the shadow of death. So there's no mythical rope bridge or escalator that takes you upward to the right to win. There really is a good shepherd that takes you into the valley, leads you through the valley, and takes you and allows you to access greener pastures. So I would say step out, be courageous, be brave, be prayerful. You'll be ruined for going back and for anything else, but you will have to press forwards into the future that God has for you. And so that's probably the final word would be that there will be challenge ahead, but the journey is worth it.
Amen. Thank you so much, and such a joy to have you. And I will be back in just a moment for a quick recap and some action steps for those of you on the call.
Imagine a world where passionate followers of Jesus come together to multiply, transforming lives beyond imagination. Instead of toiling with little fruit, what if God's abundance flowed beyond your wildest dreams? Picture those you've invested in sharing Jesus freely, creating a ripple effect of disciple making. In her new book, The Multiplier's Mindset, Cynthia Anderson reveals how shifting mindsets can revolutionize disciple making. When Cynthia and her colleagues experienced these mindset shifts, they saw enormous results, including the launching of 19 multiplying movements in Africa and Asia, transforming tens of thousands of lives. This book will help you discover hidden harvesters, see church members move from passivity to passion, and release the power of simplicity in multiplying disciples. Don't remain stuck. Learn to move toward greater fruitfulness. Visit multipliersmindset.com and get your copy of The Multiplier's Mindset today.
What a rich interview and a great book. I encourage you, dive deeper, learn from Rich. He has so much that he can teach us. We talked in this interview about how we need to lean into understanding what it means to see movemental Christianity, not only launching new movements among the unreached, which is what a lot of us who are listening have been aimed and focused at. I want to encourage you guys, stretch your vision to look at what does movemental Christianity in general look like? What would that look like in a business? What would that look like in an organization that you're involved with? And then he talked about this 4-phase framework for change. Dream, Jesus was a catalyst. Discover, Jesus was a coach. Design, Jesus was a challenger. And deploy, Jesus was a champion. I love the statement that he quoted. If we're to better the future, we must first disrupt the present. We have to be willing to be disruptors. And when we want to see change, not everyone's going to be comfortable with that. And so we want to be willing to bring disruption and provoke even some conversations that people maybe have never had before, never thought of before. He talked about how we live in a very complex and rapidly changing environment, and how the pace of change is accelerating globally, and how that can at times, we both said at times it can feel very disheartening, and yet we have hope in God as we begin to imagine with him what the future can look like. We talked about the importance of not letting the vehicle become the vision, not being overly committed to our methods, instead of committed to what God is wanting to do and finding that way forward in the midst of a complex and rapidly changing environment. I loved how Rich honestly said, every day I feel disillusioned and every day I can be hopeful. And I just want to encourage all of us who are listening and considering these things. Rich talked about the importance of naming that vulnerability and saying, our world is changing so fast, and I don't know how to adapt quickly enough to all this, but I know that God wants to raise me up and use me as a leader who is adaptive, who is a learner, who is constantly imagining with Jesus what it is that he wants to do. And Rich talked about how we aim for kingdom imagination rather than human management. He mentioned the importance of experiential learning, of innovating and trying and trialing new things to see how this works, and then reflecting on that and learning from that in the field rather than just having it all in our head. We get out into the field and we try these new things. And he concluded by reminding us that greener pastures are available, but we have to be willing to go through the valley of the shadow of death with Jesus, that he carries us through those hard times as we pursue movemental Christianity and the launching of new movements among those who are lost, those who don't know Jesus. So my action step for you today is just to ask yourself, in what areas in the midst of the complexity of the world today do I feel disillusioned? And name that. Say, I'm frustrated. I feel confused. Name it, and then say, God, but I place my hope in you, and I want to imagine with you and learn with you what it is that you are doing in the world today. I want to see new expressions that maybe look different from what disciple making looked like in the past. I'm willing to imagine with you and experiment with you and dream with you and carry some other people along with me in this effort to bring about change towards a more movemental Christianity and an expression of that in the world today. God bless you guys. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you back next week for the next podcast. Bye for now. That's all we've got for this episode of Dare to Multiply. One thing that would really help both us and other people who might like to listen in is for you to rate and review the podcast, if you haven't done that yet, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen. I'd also love to connect with you on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Feel free to message me with any topics, questions you'd like addressed, or guests you'd like me to interview. Until next week, then, please remember, no matter how ordinary you feel, God's dreams for us are always bigger than we can imagine. Let's dare to trust Him for a greater harvest.